Hello and welcome back to the Wasteland, everybody. Welcome back to Fallout New Vegas, where today we're going to be taking a look at the Flamer, one of the heavy energy weapons, which we haven't actually talked about any of them so far. So this one, weirdly enough, I guess the flamethrower counts as an energy weapon. That was done from the other games, from converting it from a big gun to an energy weapon, and then later in Fallout 4, it was converted back into a big gun. So it was only an energy weapon in like this one Fallout game, and I think that was it. Anyway, the Flamer is a fairly rare weapon that you're probably not going to be finding until the mid to late game. Usually the earliest that you're going to be finding this is off of the Fiends, particularly the named ones like Cook. You can kill him and take this, and you also get an Incinerator from him. And this one is one of the few weapons that also uses the Flamer fuel. For stats, the Flamer requires 50 energy weapons to use, which isn't super high, especially by the time that you're getting these. And it does need 7 strength in order to wield it, at least effectively. That's kind of weird. I mean, the strength really doesn't matter with most of the big guns anyway. At least ones that you don't have to be all that accurate with. Because the flamethrower you really don't have to be all that accurate with. You just have to be within range of it. So you don't necessarily need the 7 strength. Although if you are going to go with a heavy weapons build, you're probably going to have high strength anyway, just so that you can carry around more stuff and go for more of the weight carry perks, because those ones are definitely useful for those type of builds. This one does 16 damage per tick, plus 2 damage for 5 seconds lingering afterwards. This is the fire that burns enemies, and this one will obviously do a little bit more damage and damage over time because of that. This one has 128 DPS, plus that 2 damage, and then for 5 seconds, all this can reset multiple times as you're burning things. So you can just keep burning things, keep the fire on them, and they will keep taking damage from it. Can be really useful against certain types of enemies, so that is kind of useful. This one has a whopping 1 crit damage to it, so hitting crits with a flamethrower really doesn't matter. It's not going to up your damage that much. This one also has a below average crit chance at 0.42. Very low. It's not going to be hitting crits super often. It does kind of count as like a full auto weapon, sort of. It actually has higher crit chance than most fully automatic weapons, but not as high as most semi-automatic weapons. This one costs 50 action points to use in VAT, so it really isn't that great of a VATS weapon to be using. This does spurt out so much fire as well, so it's not just one use of flamer fuel. This one has a 0.5 spread, although spread with the flamethrower really doesn't matter. So long as you're close, you can burn things. And if the flame is a little bit off, I don't really think it matters. I don't know why the flamethrower has spread other than it needing it, like in the code to actually function. This one has a 60 fuel tank, so it does actually have quite a bit of fuel to it. This one weighs 15 weight. It is a very heavy weapon, as you would kind of expect. And this one has 200 item health, which is pretty decent. You're actually not going to be burning through fuel too fast with the flamethrower a lot of the time, depending on what type of enemies you're fighting. So it doesn't break super fast, although you can't repair it super easy either. Even if you have like jury rigging, that can still be kind of an issue because there's not a whole lot of heavy weapons like this that are super common throughout the Wasteland. You might have to buy some other ones, or you might have to make some weapon repair kits or buy them. All of those are fine though. You're probably not going to break the flamer too fast. For the general pros of the flamer, this one does have really high damage per second, which is fantastic, as you would kind of hope for a flamethrower, and it does have the damage over time, which can be kind of useful, especially for just hitting multiple targets with this. It can also be quite good for its crowd control. The general cons of this, though, are kind of all the things that you would associate with a flamethrower. It has very short reach, so if you're fighting a lot of enemies and you're in a big open area and they have guns, that is really, really bad. Guns do hurt people using like flamethrowers like this. It's really easy to focus you down when you can't fight back with them. And this thing is fairly heavy. 15 weight is quite a bit for just one single gun, let alone if you want to carry around multiple so that you can potentially fix them up. And the fuel can actually be surprisingly heavy too, at least if you're playing on the hardcore difficulty. Fuel is also kind of a problem with this too, overall, because it can be really difficult to find a lot of fuel with this sometimes. There are a couple different fuels that you can use, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But most of the time, you're probably just going to go with regular flamer fuel, and there's not a whole lot of places where you can easily buy this like some of the other ammos can be. So sometimes this can be an issue, sometimes it's not such a big issue, because a lot of like robots tend to carry around fuel on them. So if you're going to like old world blues, it's actually not too hard to find this. But in the regular Wasteland, it can be sometimes kind of difficult. For the ammos that we do actually have available for the flamer, we just have 3. We have the regular flamer fuel. This one does just regular damage. This is probably going to be the most common fuel that you're going to be finding and or using, and you can also recycle this at the workbench, which is nice, so you can potentially get more fuel out of that. You have the homemade flamer fuel, which you can also make. However, this one doesn't actually increase anything besides breaking your weapon faster. It breaks your weapon 3 times faster and comes with no upside to this. So I'd say always avoid the homemade fuel unless you just really don't have anything else and you're going with like a full fire build. And then it also has the optimized fuel as its third one, which this one is actually pretty good. This one gets you more damage, even though it does technically break your weapon a little bit quicker. I would say the more damage is definitely worth it though. In order to get this, you do need the perk Vigilant Recycler, and then you can just make this at a workbench, converting your regular fuel into the optimized fuel. For an overall rating on my tier list for the Flamer, I'm actually going to put this one into C tier. The Flamer is really kind of awkward to rank, because it either is amazing in certain situations and against certain types of enemies, or it's absolutely terrible. In any sort of situation where you are fighting a lot of small enemies that aren't moving particularly fast, or even if they are moving fast and you can keep crippling them, then the Flamer can be really good. So this can be amazing against bugs. It can be really good against like rad scorpions. It can be good against ants. It can be great against Cazadors from time to time, as long as there's not too many of them. So as long as you can keep backing up and just keeping this on them, and they don't have very much health, and they also usually don't have very much armor, although even with the heavily armored rad scorpions, the Flamer can still actually melt them pretty fast. It works really well against those type of enemies. Against faster moving enemies though, like say Deathclaws that can take a hit and can hit back really hard, this isn't really all that useful a lot of the time. And against ranged enemies, this one really isn't all that useful, because if the enemies just keep staying at range, say they have brush guns or sniper rifles or hunting rifles or anything like that, you're going to have to pretty much face tank through that or keep bouncing between cover in order to burn them. Now, if you're fighting these guys indoors, that's not really a big deal, because the flamethrower can work really well. It works basically as well or sometimes better than something like a shotgun or a submachine gun could in those same situations. It's just that a shotgun and a submachine gun can work much better at longer ranges too, to where you don't have just the reach of the flamer and that's it, and anything else beyond that you just have to walk to burn things with it. So that's why I'm going to put it into the C tier, and I think that's an okay reasoning for it. There is still a modded version of this, which we'll go over quickly. I'm not actually going to include that on the ranking for the tier list though, because it doesn't change it that much, and there is a unique version of the Flamer too. So the modded version is just an expanded fuel tank. This doubles your overall fuel, so you go from holding 60 fuel up to holding 120 fuel. This is kind of just a quality of life bonus to the weapon. It's really not that necessary. It feels similar to like the Silent 22's magazine extension, where it's fine. It's kind of cool to have it, but there's not a whole lot of situations where this is going to be super necessary or be like a huge advantage over just having the regular flamer. 60 fuel in it is generally good enough. You don't necessarily need to have even more going up to 120. Let's talk about the unique version now. This one is in the Gunner's Arsenal DLC. This one is called Cleansing Flame. This one is unique in a couple different ways. You don't have to buy this one. You have to buy it from the Silver Rush, assuming that the Silver Rush is still around. If you killed all of them, then it will be at the Gun Runners. So you can always buy this no matter what. The Cleansing Flame requires 50 energy weapons and 7 strength, the same as the regular flamethrower. This one does 15 damage per hit, so actually 1 less damage per hit with the flame than the regular flamer, but it does do 10 damage per second over the course of 6 seconds. So it will burn more and burn slightly longer than the regular flamethrower, but do less on the direct flame. This isn't that noticeable in a lot of the situations, but it is something to kind of keep in mind. Damage per second also kind of reflects this, where its damage per second is 105, again lower than the regular flamer, but it is still 10 damage per tick for 6 seconds, so that you can burn things out fairly fast, and it makes so you are more fuel efficient than a regular flamethrower because of this. This also does 1 crit damage, and this one also has a 0.1% chance of hitting a crit. So it's very low, and again, crits really don't matter on a weapon like this. Whether you build crits or not, it doesn't really matter. It's kind of the same thing for explosives. This one actually even costs more action points at 55 action points to use in VATS, so it's really not a great weapon to be using if you're running a VATS build. This one has 1.5 spread, so it has even more spread than the regular flamer, and I think this is actually the overall cone of the fire than anything else. So that's kind of a bonus, I guess. It depends how many enemies you're fighting. If you're fighting 1 or 2 enemies, it likely won't matter. If you're fighting a bunch of enemies, it might matter, but it might not as well. This one does hold 100 fuel in it rather than 60 fuel or the 120 fuel, so it's kind of in between. This one weighs more than a regular flamer too, coming in at 22 weight for some reason, and this one has 300 item health, so it takes longer to break this. This one is also a little bit unique in that it has blue flames rather than the red flames. These flames don't actually really do anything different, it's just they are visually different and they do look really cool. Kind of the same pros and cons apply to the Cleansing Flame as the regular flamethrower, and I don't necessarily think the Cleansing Flame is really worth going out of your way to get unless you're just doing a fire only run, which could work, but I still don't even think that the Flamer and the Cleansing Flame are the best fire weapons. So I'm going to put this actually in the same spot as the regular Flamer and put it into C tier, where again, indoors it can be pretty amazing. Outside, it can be hit or miss depending on the enemy type that you're fighting. And again, it might not be worth getting, especially since this one weighs more and it is going to cost you quite a bit. There is also some perks that we should probably talk about that could affect the flamethrower. The main one is going to be Pyromaniac. This is one of the few weapons that does get a bonus from Pyromaniac, and Pyromaniac is the highest damage boosting skill in the game, or at least one of them. This gets you 50% more damage with all fire weapons. This can actually be pretty decent for the flamethrower. It definitely helps it kill things a little bit faster than it otherwise would, and it's a good use of your fuel, which again, fuel can sometimes be an issue, so that might be useful for you. You can also take the perk Heavyweight. Heavyweight could be really useful in the Flamer build too, because both these weigh over 10 weight, so that will cut them in half, meaning that the regular Flamer goes down to 7.5 weight, and the Cleansing Flame goes down to 11 weight, making them more reasonable to carry around. You could also go with Pack Rat to make the fuel a little bit lighter. That would be nice. And you can also stack energy weapon perks on this, like the Meltdown perk, which can be good, but also a bit dangerous if you're using it with the flamethrower. It can make it so you have even more crowd control, because now if you kill something with your flamethrower, it's probably going to explode and deal damage to everything around it, but you're still within flamethrower reach of killing things. So if you're fighting particularly fast-moving enemies, you can kill the enemy, have it melt down, and blow up right in front of your face, and that can easily cripple your limbs and easily take out big chunks of health. So in conclusion, should you use the Flamer and the Cleansing Flame? My answer is going to be maybe. It depends on what type of build you're going with. If you're going with a heavy energy weapons build, then yeah, absolutely sure, it's good. If you're going with a general purpose build, there are a couple locations that you can use the flamethrower in pretty well, like any of the vaults. The flamethrower actually works surprisingly well, because you're basically always within flamethrower reach of anything that you need to fight. So in that way, it's actually not that bad. Out in the open, it can be a bit rough. And if you don't like the extra weight and you don't like carrying around all the fuel, then I would say no, don't bother with the flamethrower. This one's totally going to be dependent on your build or your playstyle, as opposed to the weapon just being super strong or potentially kind of weak. Tell me your thoughts on the Flamer and its unique version, the Cleansing Flame, as well as I guess the modded version, even though that's just more tank size, which I mean is still good, but nothing way crazy. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Incinerator and the Heavy Incinerator. This is a weapon that first showed up in Fallout 3, and this is a different take on the flamethrower. So the Incinerator, rather than shooting out regular fire, this actually fires out fireballs that work similar to grenades. And funny enough, you can actually get one of these weapons very, very early on into New Vegas. There's actually 2 that are guaranteed spawns very close to the start. One, you need the shovel if you want to go over to the Yangtze Memorial. You can dig up one of the graves and it always has an incinerator in it, which is pretty awesome. And then if you go over to Prim, there is also the escaped convict leader that is guaranteed to have the incinerator as well. Heavy incinerators are a bit more rare. The only enemies that really carry them around are like the super mutants, and those are at fairly high levels where they have them. The AI is also insanely accurate with the incinerator, so incinerators are not to be underestimated, because if you have like a bunch of super mutants, they can actually lob these directly down on top of you from quite the distance away, and even getting behind hills and behind cover may not actually protect you from these. So let's talk about each of them. First up, we have the regular incinerator. This one requires 25 energy weapons and 6 strength to wield. Not actually that much strength for a heavy weapon. It's kind of a lot of strength for an energy weapon since they don't really cost that much. But hey, 25 energy weapons is really easy to get, so that's pretty nice. This one does 1 damage on direct hit from the actual fireball hitting. Then this does 20 explosive damage. Although weirdly enough, the incinerators are not affected by explosive perks. I guess besides hit the deck, which would give you damage resistant towards explosions, but that would only be your own explosion, at least counting the incinerator. So you don't get more damage if you want to stack like Demo Expert on top of this. And then this also deals fire damage. It deals 4 fire damage over 8 seconds. So you have multiple types of damage here, and the damage that it does is actually pretty decent, especially into the early game. This does 42 damage per second, plus the fire on top of that, so you can add up the damage per second even higher than this, as well as the fire does splash to multiple enemies, so that can actually be really nice for spreading damage over time to this. This one has a big old 1 for crit damage. It's very similar to like the flamethrowers, where this doesn't really do that much crit damage, and building crits for it isn't really that good. This has a weird crit chance though at 1.67 times, so that's better than normal. Definitely an odd amount of crit chance, and crits don't really matter with this, so building for luck I don't think is the best for this. Not saying building for luck wouldn't be good on a fire build, because some of the other weapons like the Saturite Fist Superheated that we talked about not too long ago, and the Shish Kebab can be really, really good with crits, the Shish Kebab in particular. but the Incinerator and the Heavy Incinerator aren't really those type of weapons. This costs a big old 50 action points to use in VATS, which is a lot. This sadly does not work very well in a VATS build. It just takes up way too much action points for you to use it, and really doesn't do a whole lot. It's similar to like the flamethrowers, where they're best used outside of VATS. This has a 0.1 for spread. The regular Incinerator is actually surprisingly accurate. Now, the fireballs do actually have travel time, as well as they do drop from the gravity. So lobbing these higher can help quite a bit. Something like Heave Ho doesn't really affect this, I don't believe, because it does affect other explosive weapons, but I don't think the Incinerator is one of them. I could be wrong about that. I actually didn't test it. But at a distance, you can use this basically as a grenade launcher. Just try to lob it directly onto enemies, which can be pretty good. This has a 30-round magazine capacity, and this only consumes 1 fuel every time that you shoot it, making it probably the most efficient use of flamer fuel. Most of the other flamer weapons take either a lot of fuel like the flare gun, or they go through fuel really fast like the flamethrowers. The Incinerator and the Heavy Incinerator don't. They're one of the better price to performance weapons, I guess, when it comes to ammo. The regular Incinerator weighs 12, so it is fairly heavy. This does make it so heavyweight does affect this weapon. It also affects the Heavy Incinerator, like a lot of these heavy energy weapons or heavy guns. Heavyweight is actually really nice because it can cut their weight in half. And then this has 200 item HP, which is actually a lot for an energy weapon, and it doesn't go through it very fast, even though you can spam the Incinerator pretty quick. So overall, the Incinerator is actually a pretty decent early game weapon. I remember on one of my runs where I was just doing a grave robber only run, the Incinerator actually came in useful a lot more than what I thought it would, because I don't really use this weapon a whole lot, but it's actually a pretty decent weapon. For the pros of these weapons, they do have good damage and good damage per second, as well as damage over time. All of that is actually really nice with this weapon. It's pretty decent against crowds, and it has really good AoE as well. It works very similar to a grenade launcher so that you can splash damage to multiple enemies, and then the fire will take down damage after that. So this is actually really good for picking off crowds, especially crowds of the weaker enemies, or crowds that are hiding behind something. For the major cons though, ammo can be potentially an issue since flamer fuel can sometimes be rare. It depends what type of enemy you're fighting or where you're going. It has high action point cost, so it's really not good in a VATS build if you want to be using that. A lot of energy weapons are really good in a VATS build. This one sadly is not. And these weapons are fairly heavy. They can also be heavy thanks to the ammo, but if you have something like Pack Rat, that can actually cut down the weight. And speaking of perks, there aren't really a whole lot of perks that really affect these. Heavyweight is one of them to cut their weight in half, so the Incinerator will go from 12 to 6. The Heavy Incinerator would go from 15 to 7.5, making them far more manageable. Pack Rat could be another one since you can just carry around more weight and more fuel if you're playing on the hardcore difficulty. If you're not, then you don't need to worry about that perk. And Pyromaniac does affect these weapons, thankfully. So Pyromaniac is an awesome perk to have since it gives you the highest amount of damage out of any perk in the game. There is also a couple different fuels that you can put into this too. So you have the regular flamer fuel. This just deals regular damage over time. Everything about it is pretty normal. And then you've got the homemade fuel, which gives you regular damage but breaks your weapon 3 times faster. Why this is in the game and doesn't have any bonuses to it for having that big of a negative, I have no idea. Never use the homemade fuel. If you're going to make it, just sell it. That's a better use of it. And then you also have the optimized fuel, which you can get if you have the Vigilant Recycler perk. This gets you 30% more damage and breaks your weapon only 10% faster. This is the one that I would recommend if you can get it. But if you can't, then regular flamer fuel will work just fine for these two, since they do all the same damage over time. This only affects the direct and explosive damage from it. For an overall rating on my tier list, I would actually put the Incinerator pretty high. I'd put it up into B tier. I think it's actually pretty good. It's really good for an early game weapon. If you're going with a fire build, it may actually be your very first fire weapon. So that can actually be really nice if you want to run a Pyromaniac build. I've never actually done a build like that, but I assume that it would be very fun. Now let's move over to the Heavy Incinerator, which you're probably going to be getting into the later game. So the Heavy Incinerator requires 100 energy weapons and 8 strength to wield. Quite a bit more than the regular Incinerator, and that's getting pretty high up there in terms of any weapon that you need requirements for. The miniguns are a little bit higher, but not much else really is. So a lot of point investment there. This one deals 15 damage on direct hit, so quite a bit more damage. Then this one deals 20 explosive damage, same as the regular Incinerator. And then this one deals 8 fire damage for 5 seconds. So it has a more damaging burn, but the burn lasts not quite as long as the regular Incinerator. This has 140 damage per second, plus the fire damage over time, so you can actually add that up quite a bit more depending on how many enemies you're hitting. This one has 5 crit damage. A lot more than the regular Incinerator, but you still don't want to be building crits for it. This one has half the crit chance of the regular Incinerator, or roughly that, where it's got 0.83 times, so you're less likely to hit crits with it. I don't know why this isn't just a 1 times crit modifier. It wouldn't matter for either of these weapons, but okay, I guess. This one still costs the 50 action points to use, so it's still not great in VATS. This one has a 0.5 spread, so it has worse spread than the regular Incinerator. I'm not entirely sure why that is. It shouldn't matter too much unless you're really lobbing this at a distance, but even so, the fireballs still have splash on them, so being a little bit inaccurate doesn't really matter that much. This one holds 24 rounds in it rather than the 30, although it still only consumes 1 ammo every time that you shoot it. This weighs 15 weight, 3 more than the regular Incinerator, and this has the same item health at 200. This is just generally a straight upgrade to the regular Incinerator. If you like the regular Incinerator and you wanted something that was stronger than it, the Heavy Incinerator would probably be the way to go. And it does actually make it for a pretty decent endgame fire weapon if you want to use it. I don't know if it'd be the best fire weapon. I'd still rather have the Superheated Saturite Fist or the Shish Kebab, just because I think those get better use out of the perk Pyromaniac. But the Heavy Incinerator is definitely good for like a ranged option for your fire build. So I would still consider this one to be better than Incinerator, and I'd put it up into A tier on my tier list. I think it's actually quite good. So would I recommend the Incinerator or Heavy Incinerator? Yeah, they're actually quite good. The Incinerator is actually really good for the start if you want to use it and you've never used it before. Check it out. It's not too hard to get at least a decent amount of flamer fuel for it, and it can actually do quite a bit of damage and quite a bit of work for you, especially against like the escaped convicts. It's really nice there, or if you want to go take on the powder gangers at their prison. It can actually be pretty good, and later on the Heavy Incinerator is very fun to use. I don't think it's quite as strong in New Vegas as it is in Fallout 3. I think it's actually a really strong weapon in Fallout 3, but it's still a decent weapon overall. Tell me your thoughts on the Incinerator and the Heavy Incinerator down in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Arc Welder, a very strange weapon that's in New Vegas. This gets added with the Lonesome Road DLC, the final DLC, or quote-unquote final. You can do it at any point, but it is more the official ending of the DLCs. And this is a strange weapon that the marked men can be having. They don't always carry this around, but sometimes they do, and it's usually not that scary if a marked man has this as opposed to some of the other weapons that they can carry, especially later on in the game where they can be carrying like brush guns and 50 cals and marksman's rifles and stuff like that. The Arc Welder is not that big of a deal to deal with them then. So the Arc Welder requires 75 energy weapons to wield and 7 strength. It is a heavy weapon, which makes it kind of awkward for an energy weapon build unless you're going with a heavy weapons energy weapon build, which you're probably going to be shooting for something like the Gatling Laser or Tesla Cannon, which are both, I would say, better options than the Arc Welder. But the Arc Welder is an early game option that you can get because you can go to and from the Lonesome Road whenever you'd like, and there is some Arc Welders right at the very start of the Lonesome Road where you don't even need to fight anything. You can just go there, pick them up, and then run out if you would like. And they're actually worth a lot of money too. The Arc Welder does 9 damage per hit, which is fairly low, but this is kind of a full auto weapon, sort of. Full auto energy weapon. This does 72 damage per second, so okay damage per second. This does 1 crit damage, which is not very good at all. This has a low crit chance too at 0.36 times, which is more than a lot of other full auto weapons, but when your full auto damage is 1 extra crit damage, or 2 if you're getting sneak crits, that doesn't really matter all that much. It doesn't really factor into this. Then this costs 30 action points, which is kind of high. It's not really one of the best to be using in VATS, especially for energy weapons that have a lot of really good VATS weapons. This weighs 15 weight, so it is heavy. This has 250 item HP, which is okay. It doesn't break too fast because you can't shoot it super fast. I don't think I've ever actually broken the Arc Welder before using it, but I don't use it all that much. This also has 0.5 spread, which is kind of weird because it's a beam. So it's similar to like the flamethrower where spread doesn't really matter. And I think more spread would be better for a weapon like this since it has limited range and kind of a cone that it tries to zap things. This also has a magazine size of 30. This also uses the electronic chargeback, which is the same ammo that the Laser RCW and the Gatling Laser use, as well as the Tesla Cannon. I always forget that this weapon also uses that ammo. This also has a unique effect on it as well, where it does an additional 8 damage towards robots and an additional 4 damage towards power armor, which can actually be kind of useful. That's like the main selling point of the Arc Welder, is if you want to grab it early and you want to take it to a place like Old World Blues that has a lot of robots. For the general pros of the Arc Welder, you can get this early on, which is really cool because you can go to the Lonesome Road and immediately hop out and you don't even need to fight anything. And it does do good robot damage, but there's not a whole lot of robots in New Vegas besides Old World Blues, which is why you may want to grab this early if you plan on going there early. For the cons of this though, is that it does low damage. It's heavy, it's kind of awkward to carry around. It's not really the best for the ammo either. The ammo can be a little bit difficult to find. Electronic charge packs, I would say, are the more difficult of like energy weapon cells, I guess, besides like alien blaster cells. So you might not be able to get a whole lot of these very early on, and that can be kind of a pain for this. There are a couple perks that can help out with the arc welder too. Meltdown helps with this, so you can potentially kill more enemies. You can have them explode, which deals damage. That's pretty good on any energy weapon, as long as you can stay out of the range of it. It doesn't help that the arc welder has limited range, so that's not good either. And heavyweight can cut this in half, going down to 7.5 weight, which makes it more manageable. For the ammos, we have the standard ECP rounds, so the electronic charge packs. These have regular damage, but they punch through 2 armor, just like all the energy cells do, so that's really cool. You've got the bulk cells, which do less damage to your gun, but they also do less damage to the enemies, which is kind of a decent trade-off. You can buy a lot of these early on, and that's what I would probably be shooting for if you want to take this to Old World Blues really quick, because you can get at least a couple of those if you go to the right places, you go to the right vendors. We have the overcharge cells too. These give you 25% more damage, punch through 5 armor, break your weapon 50% quicker. They can be fine on the arc welder. You have the mag cells. They do the most amount of damage, punch through 10 armor, but break your weapon 2.5 times faster. Probably don't want to be using these in the arc welder. I feel like you can get a lot more value if you put those in the laser RCW, or if you put them in the Gatling Laser or the Tesla cannon. Any of those are better options than the arc welder. And then you also have the optimized cells, which I generally consider the best. These give you 30% more damage, punch through 5 armor, and break your weapon only 10% faster. You do need to have the Vigilant Recycler perk in order to get these though, so you have to make them yourself. For an overall rating on my tier list, I would probably put the arc welder either into D or F tier. I honestly don't think it's that great of a weapon, unless you're going to get it really early on and run to Old World Blues and take out the robots really quickly. In which case, then it can actually be pretty decent. Which is kind of a shame because it is in the Lonesome Road, but there's like no robots in the Lonesome Road, besides Ulysses iBots at the very end of the game. Outside of that, there's like no Protectrons, no Gutsy bots, no Securitrons, no anything. There's just nothing there that can actually kind of take advantage of the arc welder, unless I guess you were going to go there and only use energy weapons, in which case then you've probably brought the weakest build to the Divide, because you get that and the flare gun, and that's it, I think, for unique weapons that actually are there. Unless, of course, you're just picking up things the marked men can have, because then they can also have, like, tri-beam lasers, in which case, then you're perfectly fine. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the Tesla Cannon, a weapon that has been recommended quite a bit, and a really cool weapon. This first appeared in Fallout 3, I believe. I don't think there was a Tesla Cannon in the previous games, although there was sort of zap-type weapons like this, but not an actual Tesla Cannon. This one has been kind of scaled down from what it is in Fallout 3, where in Fallout 3 it is just an absolute powerhouse. In this, it's still quite strong. It is still really good. It's just not quite that crazy. So the Tesla Cannon requires 100 energy weapons and 8 strength to wield. A lot of energy weapons, a lot of strength, although weirdly enough, these weapons don't actually weigh very much. So you don't actually need to have like strength to carry them around, as well as the ammo that they use is, I think, the most lightweight out of any of the ammos for energy weapons, which is interesting enough. The Tesla Cannon does 80 damage on hit, and then it does an additional 20 damage for 2 seconds because this does kind of burn enemies over time, which is pretty cool. I do like that about it. This does 107 DPS. You can shoot the Tesla Cannon kind of fast, but it's a little bit awkward to be shooting really quick because you don't necessarily have that many shots in total. But you can shoot those shots out faster than what you would kind of expect for a big two-handed weapon like this. This does 40 crit damage, so half of its regular damage, which is interesting. I'm not sure why Obsidian decided to actually cut the crit chance on some of these weapons in half, at least on the higher scaling weapons, like this, the Gauss Rifle, the Super Sledge. Not entirely sure why that was, especially since this one has a 2x crit modifier, so it kind of incentivizes hitting crits, which is good. That's always cool. This costs 37 action points. The Tesla Cannons aren't necessarily the best to be using in VATS. They're not the worst by any means. They would be a decent overall option, but probably not the best, especially since energy weapons have some really crazy VATS options, and the Tesla Cannon isn't really one of those. This has extremely low spread at 0.1. It is very, very accurate at basically any range. That's really good to see. The Tesla Cannon has a mag size of 20, however, it does consume 5 ammo per shot, so you actually only have 4 shots in this, but it does load up 20 of the charge packs, and this is one of the few weapons that does use the charge pack. It's this, the RCW, and like the Gatling Laser, and those are about the only ones that use it, so it's not really in much competition with the other ones, and this one is definitely like the most sniper-like out of those weapons, whereas the Gatling Laser and the Laser RCW are more like close range, full auto guns that work really well at those ranges. This also weighs only 8, which isn't very heavy for a weapon like this. I don't know why it's so lightweight, but yeah, the Tesla Cannon isn't affected by the heavyweight perk or anything. You don't need it if you want to cut this thing's weight in half. Well, you can't really do that. Pack Rat could help with cutting down the ammo, but that helps with every weapon if you're playing on the hardcore difficulty. And the Tesla Cannon has 80 item health. So it can break kind of fast, although you're not going to be shooting the Tesla cannon a whole lot, usually. You can kind of spam this, but I tend to use it more similar to kind of like the missile launcher. Sort of. It's like a mix between a missile launcher and like the Gauss rifle, where I'm going to be using this at long range to mostly engage enemies, and not really use it at close range, although at close range it's not too bad either. It's just the reload speed is a little bit slow, so after you fire out those couple shots, then I usually end up putting it away and then switching to whatever my other energy weapon is that I have for like my go-to at close range. For the general pros of the Tesla cannon, this one does do high damage and has very long range. Those are fantastic things about this weapon. It's really good for engaging enemies. For the cons of this one, it is very rare. It's really hard to find Tesla cannons. The Brotherhood will sell them, and I believe the Silver Rush can sell them, but they're about the only two that actually do, and basically no enemies carry around Tesla cannons. Not even the Brotherhood carries around Tesla cannons, so you're probably going to be having to buy this, or having to spawn it in, or there's a couple of places where you can find it. I think you can find one in the Brotherhood Stave House, but that might be the only one that you can find. You could potentially run into ammo issues with this too, and item health issues, but those usually don't pull up too often, because you don't need to shoot this out too often. It doesn't eat through ammo that fast, as well as the ammo that it does have is pretty good. Health, if you have weapon repair kits, it's pretty easy to fix, or if you have jury rigging, it's fairly easy to fix these as well, so that might not be such a big deal. The other kind of con that I noticed when I was testing this out more extensively, because I don't use the Tesla cannon too often, at least the regular one, is that if you're shooting at very long range against small enemies, it's kind of difficult to hit them because the beam seems to be much bigger than it actually is when it counts as a direct hit on something. So it's really easy to hit really big targets, like if you're shooting at a Deathclaw or a giant rad scorpion or something, really easy to hit them. But if you're shooting at like a human-sized enemy, sometimes it looks like you just shoot right through them, but I guess you shot to the side of them or shot underneath their arm or something like that. And I found it to be a little bit awkward, at least to where it was like human-sized enemies and smaller than that. Bigger enemies weren't such a big deal. There are a couple of perks that help out with this one too. There's nothing that actually directly helps this, because this isn't a laser weapon, so it doesn't benefit from like Laser Commander, and it's not a plasma weapon either, so it wouldn't benefit from like Plasma Spaz, but it can still benefit from like Meltdown if you want to do more AoE damage, and crit perks can also help this if you want to build them, so that can be kind of nice. There is also the different ammo types that you can use in this. Since this does use the electronic charge pack, it has a couple different options there. You've got the standard packs, which just give you regular damage, however they do cut through 2 armor. That's something that's really cool about energy weapons, is that their ammo does give you armor breaking. You have the bulk cells, which you can usually buy a lot of them, and honestly, Tesla Cannon's not bad at using them. This reduces your damage by 15%, but it breaks your weapon 15% slower, so it's not that big of a deal. You have the overcharge cells, which give you 25% more damage, punch through 5 armor, but break your weapon 50% faster. You have the max charge cells, which give you 50% more damage, but break your weapon 2.5 times faster. If you're putting those in the Tesla Cannon, you will hit things really hard, but you'll also break the weapon really fast too, especially the other versions of this that we need to talk about too, because the regular Tesla cannon, weirdly enough, actually has the most item health out of any of them. And then we also have the optimized cells, which these ones give you 30% more damage, punch through 5 armor, and only break your weapon 10% faster. I'd highly recommend that you just use the optimized cells. You will need a perk to get this. You'll need Vigilant Recycler, but it is totally worth it because it is very, very useful for these type of weapons. For an overall rating for the Tesla cannon, I'd probably put this one up into A tier. It's a pretty solid all-around weapon. I like it for engagements, although I don't use the regular Tesla cannon too often because I usually get the unique version or versions of it faster than I get the regular version. So let's talk about the unique versions. There is 2 of them. One of them is DLC and one of them is the base game. We're going to be talking about the one in the base game first. This is called the Tesla Baton Prototype. You can find this very far south on the map, where you have the atomic test site where the ghouls are, and there's a hunting shotgun there, which is pretty awesome. But if you go a little ways further than that, you'll find the Crash Vertibird there. The robots down there are actually pretty tough because they're like Mr. Gutsies and the Sentry Bots, so they are pretty dangerous sometimes. You have to be careful about that. They can have missile launchers, and the plasma rifles they have also hurt quite a bit. But if you can kill these guys, or if you can, I guess, sneak past them with like a stealth boy, then you can grab this off of a corpse that's nearby. I think it's just a skeleton that has it. This one requires 100 energy weapons and 8 strength as well. It does visually look different, whereas the regular Tesla cannon's blue, this one is yellow, which is pretty cool, I guess, if you like that color. This one does more damage, 90 damage per hit, and then 25 damage for 2 seconds afterward. Has 121 DPS, which is nice. This one does 45 crit damage, so still following the trend of cutting its regular damage in half for the crit damage, don't know why. Has a 2 times crit modifier, very good, also costs 37 action points. This one is even more accurate than the previous gun. and the previous gun was already super accurate. This one is 0.08 spread, so very minimal spread at any range. This one still weighs 8, but instead of having the 80 item health that the regular Tesla cannon has, this one only has 40. It's cut in half, so this one breaks really fast, and that can be kind of an issue. This is generally like my go-to for the Tesla cannon if I want something, but I'm not using it a whole lot even in energy weapon builds. It's just it's something I can get pretty early on because it's not difficult to get like pulse grenades or pulse mines or even pulse grenades for your grenade rifle and take out the robots in order to actually pick this up. But with its low item health and with me usually not having jury rigging by the time I get it, I usually save it until I have like jury rigging so I can fix it, or I have weapon repair kits so I can fix it so I can use this for an engage. I also forgot the mag size. Mag size is 24 on this one, but it still takes 6 ammo per shot. So it's taking up more ammo, but you do have the same amount of shots that you otherwise would. These shots are just more powerful. This one is pretty decent too if you can get it early on enough, and you actually can get it fairly early on if you would like to. It's pretty decent, but I think I would still probably put it up into A tier. I don't use it that much just because it breaks really fast, and that's kind of my major problem with it. Now there is one more Tesla cannon, and this one can be found in Old World Blues. This one can be found at Elijah's Overlook, and this is Elijah's jury-rigged Tesla cannon. So Elijah made a Tesla cannon inside of Old World Blues, and this one is pretty cool. This one requires 100 energy weapons and 8 strength to wield as well. This one does 85 damage per shot, and then it does 20 damage for 2 seconds. So it's right in between the other Tesla cannons. It doesn't do as much as the prototype Tesla, but it does more than the regular Tesla cannon per shot. This one actually has the highest DPS because it has a faster fire rate than the other ones at 134, which is decent. This one also does 45 crit damage, which is also okay. Has still the same 2 times crit modifier, which is good. 37 action points, just like the other ones. This one is the most accurate out of any of the Tesla cannons, though, with a perfect 0 for spread. I believe it's only this weapon and like the alien blaster that have perfect spread like this, so it is pinpoint accurate at any distance, so long as you have the energy weapons and the strength in order to wield it effectively. Otherwise your person will still sway when shooting it. This one holds 30 rounds in it rather than the others, and this one actually just takes up 5 ammo per shot. So you actually get 6 shots with this one, so you get the most amount of shots out of this, which gives you the most DPS, at least in a long drawn out fight. This one also weighs 8 like the other Tesla cannons, and this one only has 50 item health. So it's a little bit better than the prototype, but still worse than the regular one, and it can break really fast. This one is one of the strongest weapons that you can find in Old World Blues, and it's really cool to use there. I still find myself using like the LAER that's modded out, or even Elijah's LAER over Elijah's jury-rigged Tesla cannon. But I still can't deny that this one is strong, so I'm also going to put this one up into A tier too. I think all of these are very solid weapons. I could see people arguing them for S tier though too. They are very good, they are very fun. I don't use them a whole lot, which is why I don't have as strong of an opinion about them. I still end up using things like the LAER or the Gauss rifle over these for similar jobs. But if you like the look of them, and they do look really cool, then by all means use them. Would I recommend the Tesla cannon? Sure. If you like using it, if you like the look of it, go for it. It's really, really cool. If energy weapons aren't your style, then maybe not, but that would be about the only exception to this. Or I guess if you don't have any ammo. Thank you guys so very much for watching this. Tell me your thoughts on the Tesla cannon and all of its variants down in the comments below. How do you enjoy using this weapon? I really like this weapon in Fallout 3. It's one of my absolutely favorite weapons. In New Vegas, less so, but it's just because it's more rare. And the Tesla cannon in Fallout 3 was like a one-of-a-kind thing that you're not getting until the very end game anyway. Or maybe it was a two-of-a-kind thing. Don't remember how many you could get in Fallout 3. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Plasma Caster. This is a very interesting weapon in Fallout New Vegas, and a weapon that is added with the Gunrunner's Arsenal DLC. And interestingly enough, the Plasma Caster, or at least the model for it, is actually the same model that is used for the original Plasma Rifle in the first 2 Fallout games, and I believe Fallout Tactics as well. This is what the original Plasma Rifle looked like, and the Turbo Plasma Rifle. This was later changed in Fallout 3 to what is kind of known as the Plasma Rifle now in Fallout, and it's the same model used in Fallout New Vegas, as well as a very similar model to Fallout 4 and to Fallout 76. So let's talk about the Plasma Caster and how good this weapon is. So the Plasma Caster is one of the heavy energy weapons in the game, similar to like the Tesla Cannon or the Flamers. This one requires 100 energy weapons to wield, so a lot, and it also requires 8 strength to wield. This is one of the highest requirements for any of the energy weapons. The Plasma Caster does 65 damage per shot, which is quite high. That's actually a really good amount of damage per shot. This one does 195 DPS, which is also quite high. You can fire the Plasma Caster fairly fast for this. Not as fast as other weapons, and it still has the travel time from a plasma weapon, but it still can be a lot of DPS, especially at close and medium range. This does 65 crit damage, so very high crits, 1x crit modifier, so average crits overall. This one only costs 25 action points to use in VATS, which isn't super high. It's kind of high compared to a lot of energy weapon rifles, but not very high compared to a lot of weapons overall in Fallout. So if you want to use this in VATS, it's actually really good for that. This one has 0.7 spread, so not the most accurate, but not the least accurate either, and plasma does have a bigger hitbox than other projectiles, so that kind of helps it. This one holds 10 rounds in it before you have to reload, which is okay. The reload is a little bit slow on this one since you have to pull the whole pack out and then put a new pack in, so it does take some time for that, and you're going to be having to reload this one fairly often. The plasma caster weighs 20 weight, so it is very heavy, and it has 80 item health, which is okay. That's fine. It's about the same as what you'd get out of a plasma rifle overall, shot for shot, before it really breaks. It's not that much different from it, and you do get more damage from this, so it could be worth it in that regard. It's not the most amount of item health, and you probably need to fix this up fairly regularly, but it's not the worst either. For the general pros of the plasma caster, this one does do high damage per shot, it has high damage per second as well, and it has a great ammo type. The microfusion cells are super common, super available, and there is a lot of good variety to them, as well as just the base microfusion cells are nice since they have armor breaking on them. For the major cons of the plasma caster though, these are very rare. You're probably not going to find plasma casters on enemies. You can get them off of a few enemies because high level trauma suits can actually carry this in Old World Blues. You can get them from that, but they're fairly rare anyway. And I believe the marked men can actually carry this. I think I've seen a few marked men actually have plasma casters. It's very rare for them to have it, but I think that they can have this. It's much less common than some of their other weapons that they carry around, like brush guns and anti-material rifles. This weapon is also very heavy. That's its other major con, is that it weighs 20. So it's going to weigh you down. You're going to need ammo for it, which is going to weigh you down as well, assuming you're playing on the hardcore difficulty. And you may want to take weight-related perks so that you can kind of either get more weight or reduce this thing's weight. There are a couple of perks that help out with this too. You can have heavyweight, which does cut its weight in half, so it goes down to 10. Far more manageable then. That isn't so bad. You can have plasma spaz, specifically for this one since it's a plasma weapon, and that actually helps it out quite a bit. You can also just take other VATS related perks, which will help this one out as well. And you could take something like meltdown, which meltdown makes it so whenever you kill an enemy, it explodes and then can deal damage to other enemies, giving you some more AoE. Can be really nice, especially with the sneak attacks from something like the plasma caster, since it does such high base damage. For the different ammos, this one can have regular microfusion cells, which have 2 armor breaking on them, really nice. You have bulk cells, which don't have armor breaking, and they do a little bit less damage, but they do less damage to your gun. Can be useful, especially if you want to buy a bunch of these from like the Silver Rush. You're probably also going to have to buy the plasma caster from the Silver Rush, since them and the Brotherhood are about the only two that actually sell plasma casters at any rate. You have the overcharge cells. These give you more damage, break your weapon a little bit quicker, and they punch through more armor. You have the max cells, which gives you a whole bunch more damage, but break your weapon really fast and give you even more armor breaking. This can be really good on the plasma caster, since it has high base damage, and that's usually the best place to use max cells. Something like this, or the Gauss rifles, Tesla cannon, can all be really good uses of the max cells, or even something like the tri-beam laser if you want to just do really high DPS and you don't mind breaking your weapon super fast. And then you also have the optimized cells, which give you more damage and break your weapon slightly faster, as well as give you armor breaking equal to the overcharge cells. Those ones I would consider the best, and what I would load into this, as well as what I'd load into the majority of my energy weapons. But if you want to run max cells in this, it can be really good. If you want to run regular cells, it can be pretty good in the plasma caster overall. For an overall rating for the plasma caster on my tier list, I think I'd probably put this thing up into A tier. It's got some quirks, and it's not really one of my favorite energy weapons to be using, so I might be a little bit biased towards this. But it's still quite strong. It's still very good. It still does a lot of DPS, and it can work out really well in most situations. It's just that there are a couple situations where it feels a little bit awkward and where I have to reload it a little bit more than what I would like. It's also not my favorite plasma weapon. I would probably give that to like the plasma rifle, at least the unique one. That one's just really nice. It just has really good stats. It's very handy to be carrying around, and it's just a little bit better than something like this in my opinion. But if you like the plasma caster and you want to go with a heavy energy weapons build, I can totally understand going for this because it is a really good weapon. Now there is a unique version of this too, which is in the Gunrunner's Arsenal DLC as well. You do have to buy this one. This one is called Smitty's Special. This one you can buy from the Silver Rush in Freeside. You're going to need a lot of caps for this. It's going to cost you quite a lot. It's pretty much on par with the more expensive weapons like the Two-Step Goodbye or the Bozer, so it's going to be very expensive for you to buy this. It's probably going to cost you like 20,000 caps or so, depending on your barter level. But this one is unique, and it functions quite a bit differently than the regular plasma caster, where the regular one is a semi-automatic large weapon thing. This one is a fully automatic large weapon thing. So this is kind of like the equivalent to the Gatling Laser, but for plasma weapons. So this one also requires 100 energy weapons and 8 strength to wield, same as the regular one. This one does less damage per shot at 35 damage, which is still fairly high, but it's not as high as the regular one. This one has higher DPS at 245 because it is full auto, so you can shoot this out much faster. This one has less crit damage at 35, same as its regular damage. A much lower crit chance though. Since it's full auto weapons usually don't benefit from crits all that much, or at least don't hit crits super often. This one has a 0.1 times crit modifier rather than the standard 1 times crit modifier of the regular plasma caster. This one costs 30 action points to use, more than the regular one, which was a little bit odd. I'm not sure why that is. I think the regular one is better in a VATS build, whereas this one is better in a non-VATS build if you just want to be spraying this at enemies. I think that this one's a little bit better in that role. It's not terrible in VATS at all, but it's not necessarily one of the best. This one has more spread at 1.3, which isn't that much more for an automatic weapon. It doesn't even quite double in its spread, so that's kind of useful. It's not super inaccurate either. It can still be used at basically all the ranges the plasma caster can, maybe less useful at very long range. This holds 20 rounds in it rather than 10 rounds, which helps with it being full auto. This one also weighs 20 weight, and this one does have higher item health at 220. Since it is full auto, you're probably going to be going through more ammo with this. The Smitty Special is in kind of an awkward spot where I don't really think that it fits a great role, because it is a full auto microfusion weapon, and there's really not many of those in the game. Actually, I think this is the only full auto microfusion weapon in the game, because the Gatling Laser doesn't take them, and I don't think anything else does. I think this is the only full auto microfusion weapon, which is a little bit strange because it's always competing with all the semi-automatic weapons or the single shot weapons. And for that, it's not really a great price to performance in terms of what you're getting for every shot. You can stack a whole lot of shots with this though, so that does help. I guess you could also count the tri-beam laser as a multi-shot thing since it uses up multiple cells, or the regular plasma rifle, or I guess the Multiplas Rifle because they all use multiple cells. But it's not really the same thing as a full auto weapon. So this mini special, I wouldn't actually say is any better or worse than the regular plasma caster. I would say it's a on par option. So I would also put this one up into A tier on my tier list. It's a little bit weird, and I know a lot of people really enjoy the regular plasma caster over this one. I find them both to be pretty good. I find them both to be pretty fun to use. The regular plasma caster is much better shot for shot, but the Smitty Special, if you have an excess of microfusion cells, is really fun and still quite strong. Tell me your thoughts on the plasma caster and Smitty Special down in the comments below. I'd love to hear them because these weapons are kind of weird and I don't even use them very much on my energy weapon runs. I end up usually going more for the regular plasma rifle or the laser rifle, and stick to those, and then something like the Gauss rifle instead of something like the plasma caster. We're going to be taking a look at the Gatling Laser. This is our final heavy weapon, although we will be talking about the plasma caster with the mod on it slightly because I forgot about that in the plasma caster video, so we'll be doing that at the very end of this video. The Gatling Laser has been in, I think, every single Fallout game, or almost every single Fallout game so far, and it is a very iconic weapon. It is a minigun that shoots out lasers, which is pretty awesome. I love the Gatling Laser. It looks really cool. And I don't think it's really been disappointing in any of the Fallout games. I think it's been pretty decent in all of them. So the Gatling Laser is a high-level energy weapon that you're probably going to have to buy from either the Brotherhood or from the Silver Rush. There really isn't any enemies that carry around Gatling Lasers. There's a couple, like the trauma suits can have them at very high levels in Oldwood Blues. The Brotherhood can have them, but that's about it. There's not really anybody else that carries around Gatling Lasers. The Gatling Laser requires 100 energy weapons and 8 strength to wield. So very high energy weapons, very high strength. You would kind of expect it from a weapon like this. This does 10 damage on hit, so fairly low damage, but it does 300 damage per second, and the damage per second can be exponentially higher with this depending on what ammo you're putting into it and what perks you have with the Gatling Laser. So it just rips right through just about anything. This one has 10 crit damage, so not the most on crit damage, but if you're hitting crits fairly often, this one is pretty strong. This one does have a very low crit chance at 0.02 times, so you're very unlikely to be hitting crits, unless you have certain perks, which we're going to be talking about in the perks section once we get there. This one costs 30 action points, which is actually not too bad for a heavy weapon like this. This one has very low spread at 0.6. That is technically the most spread out of any of the laser weapons. but it's still fairly low for a fully automatic weapon. That's still better than like the 44 Magnum in terms of accuracy. This one has a magazine of 240. This one can actually take quite a while for you to run out of ammo with it, which is kind of surprising given how fast it shoots. This one does weigh 18 weight in total, which is fairly heavy. It doesn't make it so heavyweight can affect this and cut it in half, so that's kind of nice. And this has 1500 item HP, which it definitely needs because it can go through that item HP fairly fast since you are shooting this so quick. For the pros of the Gatling Laser, this one does have high damage per second, really high damage per second, it's really good at that. And it also has a big magazine, which is good. Makes so sustained fire is really good with the Gatling Laser. The major cons for the Gatling Laser are that this one is rare, you're probably going to have to buy it, and it's probably going to be expensive, so be aware of that. It's also going to be expensive to fix if you don't have weapon repair kits or jury rigging. Jury rigging does help it out quite a bit because then you can repair this with like flamethrowers and stuff, so that's not so bad. And this one is fairly heavy. 18 weight is quite a bit of weight, as well as you do have to account for the ammo if you're playing on the hardcore difficulty, which makes it so this can actually weigh you down quite a bit. Let's talk about the perks that help out with this one, and there are some that definitely help this out. Heavyweight helps this out, sort of, unless you're going with the modified version of the Gatling Laser, in which case then it doesn't affect it. So the modified version of the Gatling Laser can already have its weight cut in half, which will take it down to 9, which is just heavy enough, or light enough, depending on how you look at it, to not be affected by heavyweight. If it weighed 2 more weight, if it was an even 20 weight, then you could cut it down to 10, and then you could cut it again with heavyweight down to 5, and that would be pretty awesome. But, I mean, heavyweight's kind of cool to cut it down to 9, that way you don't need the carbon fiber frame for this, unless you want to throw it on there, in which case, by all means, do it. Laser Commander is incredibly strong with the Gatling Laser because the way Laser Commander and Set Lasers to Fun, I believe, also works this way, where they count as their own separate crit modifier for laser weapons. So you get more crit chance with them, and they are separate from your weapon's critical multiplier. So you're more likely to hit crits with them than you would be for a weapon like the Gatling Laser, which has a really low crit modifier. That's pretty good. That makes it so crits are very effective with the Gatling Laser and work really, really well. It's actually incredibly strong if you want to go Laser Commander on the Gatling Laser. You can also take Meltdown on this. Since it's an energy weapon, you melt down an enemy and then it explodes and deals more damage to the enemies around it. Gives it even more crowd control, which is pretty awesome. And yeah, the only thing you have to worry about that is getting too close and blowing yourself up, which did happen to me a couple times when I was using the Gatling Laser, because I can kill things very fast and I don't expect that. There is also the ammo that we need to talk about with the Gatling Laser. This one uses the electronic charge packs, so this is the same energy cells that weapons like the Laser RCW use, and that means you have a couple different ammo varieties to use too. So with the regular charge packs, these ones do regular damage, but they do have armor breaking on them, which is pretty cool, just like all the energy cells. That's really nice for the Gatling Laser, especially a weapon like this that has low damage. If you can punch through more armor, that helps a lot against heavily armored enemies. You have the bulk cells, which you can buy in bulk, but these ones do 15% less damage, but they break your weapon a little bit slower. These ones can be pretty good for the Gatling Laser, so long as you're not fighting like armored enemies, because then the other cells are just going to be better for it. We have the overcharge cells. These give you more damage, punch through more armor, break your weapon a bit faster. You have the max cells. These ones give you the most amount of damage, punch through the most armor, break your weapon the fastest. These ones I don't really like to be loading into the Gatling Laser. They can be good to have on hand though, if you want to be fighting big enemies like Deathclaws, or enemies that have more armor like the giant rad scorpions. The Gatling Laser just normally can kill those enemies pretty fast, but this will allow you to kill them a bit faster, so it can be worth it to take those along. I would normally though, if I'm gonna be picking like electronic charge packs as one of my things and I have max cells of them, I'd probably be putting that in like the Tesla cannon though, because it works a bit better there. But it's fine in the Gatling Laser too. And then you have the optimized cells. These give you more damage, punch through more armor, and break your weapon slightly faster. These are the cells that I generally put into the Gatling Laser. I think they're the best ones. They just give you more damage, more armor pen, and the increase in weapon break speed is not that much better. You will need Vigilant Recycler in order to get that, but that does help out the Gatling Laser quite a bit. So for an overall rating for the Gatling Laser, I think I'm going to put this one right up into S tier. I think just the normal Gatling Laser is incredibly strong, more so if you have Set Lasers to Fun and if you have Laser Commander as perks. There is the modified version of the Gatling Laser too, which we should talk about now, where the modified version can get 2 mods onto it. One is that it can get that carbon fiber frame that we talked about, which decreases its weight from 18 to 9. That's the same thing as heavyweight, so again, if you have the perk heavyweight and you're using more heavy weapons, you won't necessarily need this. But if you don't have the perk heavyweight, this is just a straight buff to the Gatling Laser, so that's pretty good. And then there is also the laser optics, which these ones are the best because they increase your base damage by 3. So you go from 10 base damage to 13 base damage, so your DPS goes up a lot. That is a huge increase to DPS for the Gatling Laser, and again, even more so if you're running like a crit Gatling Laser build. This one is just a straight upgrade from the regular Gatling Laser, and I think it's my absolute favorite version of the Gatling Laser, so I'd put this one also up into S tier just above the regular Gatling Laser. There is also a unique version of the Gatling Laser too, which is called the Spurtlewood 9700. And this one you do have to buy from the Silver Rush, and you're also going to need the Gunrunner's Arsenal DLC in order to get it. This one looks a little bit different, and it functions a bit different. So this one is shooting green lasers rather than the red lasers. This one also has lower requirements to use. So this one requires 100 energy weapons and only 6 strength to wield. Weirdly enough, I don't know why it requires less strength. That's kind of unusual for unique weapons. This one does 16 damage on hit, which is quite a bit more than the regular Gatling Laser. This one has less DPS though at 320. That is still more than the base Gatling Laser, but this one does have a slower rate of fire than the other Gatling Laser does. And you do kind of feel that. It also has a different sound animation too when you're shooting these out. And I swear that the lasers are a little bit thicker. I'm not sure why that is. It might just be because they're green and all the other lasers are red. This one does 16 crit damage, so a bit more crit damage. Still has a very low crit modifier at 0.04. So it's not likely to hit crits, but again, if you're going to go with Laser Commander and set lasers to fun, you don't really care about that. You're just going to get more damage that way. This one also costs 30 action points to use in VATS, same as the regular one. Has slightly better spread at 0.5, making it still pretty accurate. That's quite good. That's still better than like half of the handguns, so that's kind of cool. This one's magazine size is substantially less though. This one only holds 90 rounds in it rather than the 240. I don't really like that about the Spurtlewood. I don't hate it because it still gives you plenty of ammo to be using in most situations, but it doesn't feel as good as like the 240 rounds that the Gatling Laser has. This one weighs 15 weight, so it is lighter than a regular Gatling Laser, and that does make it so heavyweight will cut this down to 7.5 weight, which is pretty good. This doesn't have like the carbon fiber frame you can put on, so you don't have to worry about that, so heavyweight could be a pretty good option if you want to be using this one in particular. And this one has less item health than the regular Gatling Laser at 1,000 rather than 1,500. I don't know why that is. That's a little bit strange too. Most of the time unique weapons have more item HP, but this one's kind of all over the place. This one's still pretty good. It's still quite strong. I would still say that this one's at least on par with the Gatling Laser. I don't think it's as good as like the modified Gatling Laser though. I think that's the best version of the Gatling Laser, and this one just doesn't feel quite the same to me. I'm still going to put it up in S tier because it's still a pretty strong energy weapon, but it's going to be on the lower end of S tier, whereas the other ones are pretty solid or pretty high S tier. So this one still feels good, but I don't know if I'd go out of my way to really get it over a regular Gatling Laser. I guess if I couldn't get a regular one with the optics on there, then maybe I'd use this one a little bit more. Okay, now that we did go over the Gatling Lasers, let's talk about the Plasma Caster, because I forgot about that in the last video, and let's rank it. This is the modified Plasma Caster, because I forgot this thing even had a mod. It has one mod which increases its rate of fire by 25%. That is really good for the Plasma Caster. This one's also going to go up into S tier. I think this is the best version of the Plasma Caster. The other ones I put into, I think, A tier, and I would kind of stick by that. Plasma Caster modded, I think, is the best version of it. Better than the unique version and better than the regular version. Thank you guys so very much for watching this. Tell me your thoughts on the Gatling Laser and its unique variants down in the comments below. I would love to hear that. I think the Gatling Laser is one of the coolest weapons in all of Fallout. Really, in any of the Fallout games, it's really one of my favorites in like Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, Fallout 4. I think it fits really, really well in the world. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody!